Without independent horror, there'd be no horror at all. There are those who only like the mainstream horror films, and I respect that, I guess. But for me, if you haven't logged in some time with some really indie, lo-fi, do-it-yourself films made by people with a few extra bucks, some like-minded friends, and a pure love of the genre, then you really don't like horror that much. I usually find some nugget of goodness in even the worst horror film, or sometimes I just revel in the awfulness of it all. And that's why I love indie horror, and that's why I love doing these low-budget binges. Let's start binging. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. The Wendigo is new on-demand and digital download from Terror Films. It's directed by Jake Robinson and written by James S. Brown, James S. Jamie Brown, and Jake Robinson. A YouTuber goes missing after going solo into the woods to seek out the elusive Wendigo. So a group of YouTubers decide to investigate his disappearance on their own. Turns out they should have stayed at home. I just can't get into the Wendigo in terms of cryptids. Bigfoot is my horse, and I'll back the big guy until my dying day. Still, after the release of the long-delayed Antlers, there was bound to be a Wendigo trend coming along in lower-budget movies. Hence, this Blair Witch Project meets Antlers mashup called The Wendigo. Jake Robinson tries his best to capture the madness and chaos of the Blair Witch Project, but never really gets there. As with Blair Witch, there's a lot of film spent looking at the backs of people as they walk through the woods, swearing at each other. I get it that the Wendigo brings out the worst in people, but that doesn't mean it's interesting to watch. The film does a decent job of peppering in little moments like lights in the woods, people popping out of the blue and then disappearing, and something peeking through the trees. But none of it is sold very well by the amateur cast. Having a YouTube channel does not an actor make. This is especially the case during the super annoying first segment featuring the YouTuber who goes missing, who is downright intolerable to watch. While the body count is high, I prefer the ominous Blair Witch to the Wendigo, as that film was subtle with its scares and imposing doom. Here, everything, like the YouTuber, is in your face and over the top. Shaky cam covers up a lot, as does out-of-focus shots. Things just go completely off the reservation by the end, where everyone is just running around and screaming. The film promises a sequel. Here's hoping the cast is more tolerable, the story's a bit stronger, and the handling of suspense and tone is a bit defter. I won't hold my breath for all of that to happen, given what's on display in The Wendigo. Play Dead is new streaming on Tubi. It's directed by Patrick Lussier and written by Simon Boyes and Adam Mason. After a bank robbery gone wrong, leaving one of the robbers dead, the surviving robber, TJ, played by Anthony Turpel, and his sister Chloe, played by Bailey Madison, hatch a plan to break into the morgue and steal evidence that may incriminate them with the crime. Chloe fakes her own death with a drug that slows down her heartbeat and wakes up in the morgue only to find herself in the middle of an organ trafficking scheme run by a twisted coroner played by Jerry O'Connell. Locked inside the morgue, Chloe fights for her life to escape with the evidence, or she'll become another body to be harvested for parts. Patrick Lussier has made a pretty solid name for himself with the Dracula 2000 series, Drive Angry, and the My Bloody Valentine remake. Since then, he kind of fell off the map and resurfaced last year with the Saw wannabe Trick. While it didn't seem like Lussier has hit his stride again with genre films, he takes a turn in the right direction with Play Dead. Play Dead is a small-scale thriller that milks a stressful situation for all it's worth. The story really makes use of the dark and morbid environment where the coroner harvests his parts and keeps a group of half-alive corpses in the basement for live organ dissection when they're needed. Lussier and writers Simon Boyes and Adam Mason put Chloe through quite the gauntlet, and while the film starts out rather slow
and feels very low budget in the first 20 minutes, once things start happening in the morgue, that's where Play Dead really kicks into gear and shines. Sure, this isn't the over-the-top action horror we saw in My Bloody Valentine or Drive Angry, but Lussier keeps the pace moving with all sorts of obstacles for Chloe to hurdle. Bailey Madison, who was in Del Toro's Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, is solid here as the lead, Chloe, though she never feels like she had any superpowers or is given much plot armor. She does offer up a realistic go-get-'em attitude worth rooting for. This helps because Jerry O'Connell is so good as the coroner, making him quite the memorable villain. I've never been the biggest fan of O'Connell, but with age, he plays despicable pretty well. The coroner is not the most original of bad guys, but the way he completely controls the environment Chloe is trapped in makes for a fun cat and mouse for a solid hour of the movie. I don't want to oversell Play Dead, but given that it was directed by a once notable director and has a solid performance from a genre actor, I felt I should point it out for those looking for an hour and a half to kill. While there is some gore, for the most part, Play Dead is a small-scale action thriller with a memorable setting and a solid performance by O'Connell. Fun film. Not a must-see, but fun nevertheless. Death Metal is new on-demand digital download and on Blu-ray, as well as streaming now on Tubi. It's written and directed by Mike Kuciak. A struggling metal band load up their tour bus and head to a farmhouse in the middle of the country to avoid distractions and record their new album. Band leader Ivan, played by Nico Zanizer, is basing the new album off of a legendary piece of music called The Devil's Concerto, a haunted piece of music that taps into hell itself and drives the listener insane. Once the band begins recording their new tracks, all hell indeed breaks loose. Reminiscent of Evil Dead and Demons by way of hard rock horrors from the 80s like Trick or Treat and Rock and Roll Nightmare, Death Metal feels like a legit underground and dangerous film. The music is most definitely hardcore, as the film opens at a death metal concert with a headbanging crowd, cheering on strutting musicians in various black metal garb and makeup. The soundtrack alone is a metal fan's dream, featuring Incantation, Cannibal Corpse, Shed the Skin, Faith Extractor, Embalmer, Nunslaughter, Blackfinger, The Convalescence, Prophecy of Azrael, and Adam Butcher's band Casket Sacrifice. But it's established early on that the band has seen better days as the crowd clears as soon as they hit the stage, and the group seems to be falling apart backstage with various conflicting motivations threatening to tear the group apart. So the desperation of the band, specifically the band leader Ivan and his girlfriend band leader Shadia, played by Shadia Martin, really illustrates how desperate these guys are at this point in their career. Writer Mike Kuciak takes his time to establish how desperate the band is to make it, and that the album feels like their last chance at greatness. This makes the film start off rather slow, focusing on the music and performances on stage to really establish who's who and what they're all about. But once they get to the farm and begin playing the cursed music, the fun really starts with death metal. Practical effects and disconcerting edits, paired with the unnatural sounds of the music, join forces to cause an extremely unstable feeling almost immediately once they get to the farmhouse. Blood is spattered copiously in all directions. There's an awesome effect where a guy's head and spine is ripped from his body as a result of a suicide, and one by one the band is taken over by demons. While the formula is evident as it follows your typical slasher possession format, Kuciak makes every murder sequence unique. I especially like the way this film is choppily edited at times to reflect the unnatural events occurring. I also love the way the possessed music is never really played, letting one's mind fill in the blanks as to what it really sounds like. It makes for a fun but nightmarish experience for all of the senses. Death Metal is definitely a low-budget movie, but it reaches for the stars and most of the time succeeds. While the leads do a great job of holding their own among the carnage, there are the usual low-budget acting issues where the delivery of some of the actors just don't match the level of emotion necessary. But with all of that metal music and blood inundating the viewer, you can barely notice it. Each death is unique, and when the band members come back possessed, they become an all-new original threat reflecting their manner of death. This reminded me of how the Cenobites were created in Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth, yet this one was pulled off with a bit more sense of style and nuance. If you're as much of a fan of the darker side of metal as I am, you're going to find a lot to love and bang your head to if you watch this low-budget shocker. Kuciak has pulled off an ambitious ballad of blood and gore with death metal, so play it loud and soak in the sights and sounds of this audio-visual nightmare. What the Waters Left Behind, Scars, aka Los Olvidados Cicatrices, is new on-demand DVD and Blu-ray from Cleopatra Entertainment. The director is Nicolas Onetti, and it's written by Camilio Zaffora. One of the Onetti brothers, Nicolas, who co-wrote and directed the original What the Waters Left Behind, as well as the semi-successful Giallo riffs Abracadabra and Francesca, has brought forth a sequel, What the Waters Left Behind, Scars. The film begins with what seems to be a preamble depicting the first act of cannibalism during a military conflict set in the Falkland Islands circa 1982. I guess the point of this scene was to say that this family has had a history of cannibalism that goes back a while. After that gruesome scene, the time shifts to present day as a metal band named The Ravens plays a seedy nightclub in Argentina. We have some getting to know you time, displaying how the band is strapped for cash and at each other's throats as they've been touring for quite a while. The drummer meets a slutty siren named Carla, played by Magui Bravi, who tempts the band to come to her place to have a real Argentinian cookout. This leads the band to Epiquen, a once thriving vacation attraction by the ocean that was devastated by a hurricane. It's now a ghost town, completely flooded with buildings in rubble or half submerged in thick muck. When one of the band members goes missing, the rest try to find them, leading them to meet Carla's family, made up of inbred cannibals, each with their own unique horrors to unleash. I found What the Waters Left Behind to be a soulless and blatant copy of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and its sequel is sort of the same. Carla is a glorified version of the hitchhiker luring our mobile home full of victims to her house. There's an older man, played by Mario Alarcón, who seems like an elder representative of the family, who even looks like an Argentinian version of the cook, and there are a few characters who are hulking monsters who pose a physical threat while looking menacing just like Leatherface. Sure, each has their own kind of kink. One's a rapist, one's a sadist, one's a chef who terrorizes his meat before carving, but basically, they're doing the job of what Leatherface has done in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre and all of its sequels. I will say that the band has much more character in this film than the hapless victims that the first film offered. They're better actors and look more distinct, though their arguments feel forced at times. While one might say a band who gets along this badly would never be together, the fact that they're in dire need of money and have been touring for quite a while explains why they're all tied together quite well. The leads, Javi, the band's tour manager, played by Agustin Olsis, and lead singer, Jane, played by Carla Kovacic, are both solid, personable actors with a nice little unrequited love story going on between them, as are the cocky guitarist Mark, played by Juan Pablo Bichel, and his vapid groupie Sophie, played by Maria Eugenia Rigon, though their characters are much more one-note. Then there's the crazy family who are all okay, but seem to be playing from the same giggling psychopath playbook. All of them seem to take great delight in the tortures they inflict, and really the only difference come from the various Road Warrior costumes they're sporting. Scars seems to linger less on the torture and rape, which is another complaint I had for the first film. Oh, they're there, it's just that it's not all as gratuitous, and less time is spent lingering on the horrible acts in this one. The film is bloody and grimy, as each family member seems to have his or her own little room where they do their heinous deeds in. This gives the film a funhouse feel, as the victims make their way through the home experiencing one shock after another. What the Waters Left Behind and its sequel have going for it is the town of Epiquen. This is an actual place. The history of the flooding is real, as evidenced by the black and white footage during the opening credits. The skeletal trees jutting out from the waters, decimated buildings, and pools of mud on either sides of the lonely streets is a character all its own. There seems to be a resentment towards the Argentinian government that is conveyed through both films, as the city seems to be something the rest of the country has left behind, leaving it for these cannibals to move in and claim for their own. Had the filmmakers taken more time to establish the character of this ghost town and taken advantage of the treacherous environment, What the Waters Left Behind and its sequel would have had something unique going for it. But that doesn't happen. The focus is inside the cannibal's home, which is much less original. I'm surprised with all of these mud pits and sludge, how no one in the crew seemed to think of having a scene where the actors or killers get down and dirty in that muck. It's an environment screaming to be used in a horror movie, but it's never dived into thoroughly. What the Waters Left Behind, Scars, is much more digestible than the gratuitous original. Its characters are better, and there's even some development between the bad guys. I will say that I did really like the music played by the band The Ravens, as well as what was used over the credits sequences, and if you like metal music, I think you will too. Though it doesn't bring a lot to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre style Family of Maniacs subgenre, I definitely prefer Scars to the uninspired original. New streaming on Screambox is We Might Hurt Each Other, aka PENSIVE, aka RUPINTOJELIS. It's directed by Jonas Trukanas and written by Titus Lussier and Jonas Trukanas. On the day after the high school graduation, the entire graduating class decides to take a trip to a cabin in the middle of nowhere, Lithuania, to party for the weekend. All eyes are on the star athlete, who has plans to head to America to compete with the pros, but one of the more unpopular students, Marius, played by Sarunas Rapolas Malisius, longs for the attention the star jock receives, including from his girlfriend, Brigitta, played by Gabija Bargaleti. But as the party revs up, the kids discover a circle of statues in the middle of a field and begin destroying them, of course, which seems to spark the ire of a masked monster named Algus, played by Marius Repsius, who sharpens his blades and decides to unleash holy vengeance on the vandalizing kids. We Might Hurt Each Other is a fun throwback to 80s slashers, right down to its burned murderer who bears a very strong resemblance to Cropsey from The Burning, and wears a wooden mask not unlike Jason's hockey mask. The film spends an awful lot of time allowing the viewer to get to know the cast, which gets pretty tedious as nothing really horror-like occurs until about the 45-minute mark. But at least by that time, we know the ins and outs of the various relationships, friendships, and rivalries that the group shares. When the carnage starts, it's quite powerful as the killer simply walks out of the field and starts slashing away at the partygoers. This type of blatant carnage makes things feel more like the chaos of a mass shooting than in "And Then There Were None" style scenario, as the kids are running around and trying to find a successful hiding place so the killer won't find them. Unfortunately, these dumbass kids choose to all hide in the same spot, making it pretty easy for the killer to wade through them with his cutlery. This leads to one very effective scene where the survivors hide among the dead bodies in order to elude the madman. All of these scenes occur so fast and makes for quite the shocking sequence of events, but man does it take a hell of a long time to get to the good stuff in this movie. There are a few scenes that suggest something awful lurks in the shadows at the cabin as soon as the group show up. The statues are quite ominous. They're tall obelisk-type structures with arms reaching up and covering their faces. There's a hint at some kind of folk supernatural horror going on, but it never really has a payoff. These statues seem to symbolize victims of the past, which tempt the kids to mock and deface them all the more in rebellion. Seeing these kids go nuts on the sculptures reminded me of the fury that occurs at some of the assemblies who tear down monuments and statues in recent years around America. I don't know if this film is making some kind of comment about all of that. It being a Lithuanian film, I kind of doubt it, but I couldn't help but associate the kids' disrespect and disregard for the past with this modern American social dilemma. We Might Hurt Each Other works in establishing its cast with memorable characters. Marius is a complex character, as is Brigitta, and while the way their stories advance and develop sort of needed that long build-up we got in the first 45 minutes, but I fear that'll be too long for many viewers who are looking for the horror stuff to happen. I liked the look of the killer. It was just different enough from Jason to be fun, while still basically looking a lot like the popular slasher. This isn't a brainless slasher film. It's quite emotionally considerate. If only the lead-up to the killings had been shorter, possibly with some killing occurring away from the group before the killers head-first rampage into the thick of them, I think this would have felt like a more even movie. As is, it's wobbly, but still a solid slasher once the first drop of blood is finally spilled. Mad Heidi is available on demand, digital download, and Blu-ray from Raven Banner. It's directed by Johannes Hartmann and Sandro Klopstein, and written by Johannes Hartmann, Sandro Klopstein, and Gregory D. Wilmar. Heidi, played by Alice Lucy, would have been delighted to grow old in the hills of Switzerland, canoodling with her secret boyfriend Goat Peter, played by Kel Matzena, and yodeling through the day on her simple farm. But when Goat Peter's goat cheese business is uncovered and he is executed by the Swedish government for illegal distribution of unsanctioned cheese, Heidi is arrested and taken to a female prison camp for cavorting with the enemy of the state. But in that penitentiary, Heidi's anger grows into an inferno of rage through some hard time in the pen and an overlong montage of training with warrior nuns. Heidi stages a one-woman war against Big Cheese and the President of Switzerland, played by Casper Van Dien. Just the trailer of Mad Heidi would fit neatly in the trailer montages between Planet Terror and Death Proof, and the movie itself would play greatly as a double feature with modern grindhousers such as Machete, Hobo with a Shotgun, Black Dynamite, or Psycho Gorman. If the mere mention of any of the aforementioned films bring a smile to your face, you just might be the type of deviant a film like Mad Heidi is looking for. While heavy on the comedy, Mad Heidi keeps the pace fast as it is telling a story that has been told many times before in women's prison exploitation films. There's the initial crime where the hero is delicate and naive and caught up in the wrong side of the law, then the extended sequences focusing on the ardors of prison life that forges our hero into harder stuff, and finally the big escape where the hero uses these skills to overtake her oppressors. The difference is that this film never takes itself too seriously. The actors play the parts with never a wink to the camera, but the situations they face are absolutely ludicrous. There's an overwhelming attention to one simple thing in Mad Heidi, and that's cheese. The filmmakers think cheese and everything that goes with it is funny. And you know what? I do too. Just saying the word cheese is fun and causes me to chuckle heartily. So instead of drugs, cheese is the underground substance threatening the government's stability. Instead of fighting for civil rights and liberties, the populace protest against cheese regulation. Modes of torture? Cheese. Every meal served in prison? Cheese. Methods of weaponry? Well, Heidi sports an awesome giant axe, but she does make Swiss cheese of her enemies with it. If you don't find the word cheese funny, well, you might want to skip this one, because that's the oft-used punchline of the entire movie. What makes Heidi so much fun is how serious the stakes are. The fight over cheese regulation is dire for the people of Switzerland, and one step outside of the party line means gruesome death. The film plays it safe for a few moments at the beginning, offering up a mass slaughter in the opening moments that is more tactfully orchestrated. But Mad Heidi shows its bloody cards, beginning with the over-the-top and gory death of Goat Peter, as his head is utterly and totally exploded by a missile fired from a crossbow at close range. After that, from the scenes of torture in the prison to Heidi's march of rebellion against her cheesy oppressors, Mad Heidi goes full-on gore with people being split in half, decapitations, people being riddled with bullets, and gallons of blood spattering in all directions. Yes, it's an excessive amount, and I loved every grossly cheesy comedic moment of the carnage. Alice Lucy really stands out with star potential as Heidi. She's a little stiff in some places, but honestly, hers and the acting of her co-stars are leagues better than the acting chops of most of the cast in exploitation films of old. Lucy is also quite easy on the eyes, making every moment she's on screen a good one. Casper Van Dien also shines as the truly bent president of Switzerland. He's a megalomaniac who is obsessed with order and cheese, sometimes in not that order, who has his cheese, milk, and chocolate delivered to him by a topless handmaiden. It was a blast seeing Van Dien barking orders and laughing maniacally, relishing in every ounce of the evil he doles out. Mad Heidi could have pushed the envelope a bit further. While the comedy never really stops, the film shies away from going full exploitation with very little nudity, and I could have used a few more segments of gore to seal the tone of the film. But aside from that, Mad Heidi is a wonderful little celebration of bullets, blood, boobs, and of course, cheese.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're